We are at Free Thought Hall in Madison with two big shooters today.
But we're not going to shoot anybody.
We're not going to shoot anybody. Peaceful. We are recording this. We are in Madison today at Free Thought Hall with two big shooters in the atheist community. It's Andrew Seidel. He's written a new book. It's called The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism Is Un-American. Joining us also, Dan Barker, co-president of your Freedom from Religion Foundation. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Now, you are the Director of Strategic Response. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's a fun title.
It's a lofty title, man. I really am like...
It's completely made up.
It's great, though. It's fabulously made up. And you're the guy on the front line doing the good work out there, initiating lawsuits, fighting the constant incursions of religion into our government. In the book, one of my favorite subjects, the founding myth. Tell us, what is the founding myth, and how does the book address it?
So in this book, I really wanted to ask one simple question. Did Judeo-Christian principles positively influence the founding of the United States of America? And the answer to that question is no, they didn't. And it's a good thing they didn't, because those principles that are central to Judeo-Christianity are actually fundamentally opposed to the values and the principles on which our nation was built. So much so that it's fair to say that those principles are un-American. And that's what I really try to do in this book. And it's centered around Christian nationalism, which is a movement to impose a Christian theocracy on the United States of America, essentially.
Now, when did this become an issue? When I grew up, I was taught quite properly that deists basically wrote the Constitution, and most of the founding fathers were deists, and if they were Protestants, they were not evangelical. So when did this misinformation become an issue? I don't recall when it changed. When did we start teaching our kids wrong?
Well, so Christian nationalism is the idea that the United States was founded as a Christian nation, that we were based on these Judeo-Christian principles, and more importantly, that we've strayed from that foundation, and that we need to get back to that foundation. They use the language of return and renewal, and they're really trying to push us towards something that never existed. You're absolutely right. And in history class, kids should be learning we were founded as a secular nation, not as a Christian nation. I think for the most part they are. And Christian nationalism was this impotent sideshow for most of the last 20 or 30 years. It was on the fringes of conservative politics, on the fringes of conservative religion, but that changed in 2016. Donald Trump was elected because of Christian nationalism. He rode a wave of Christian nationalism into the White House. The number one indicator of a Trump voter in the 2016 election was not race, it was not religion, despite how much we hear about the evangelical support of Trump, and it was not even political party. It was believing that the United States is a Christian nation. That was the best predictor of a Trump voter. And now that Trump and Pence are in the White House, they are really doing their best to impose these Christian nationalist policies on the country. And you're seeing it all over the place. I mean, if you look at what they're doing in the Department of Education with Betsy DeVos, the Muslim ban, it's infecting immigration. Even moving the embassy to Jerusalem is an element of Christian nationalism in it. It's everywhere now. They've seized power.
It appears to me that they have seized power, and this, as the populace gets less religious, how is it that the government gets more religious, and how do we stop that?
And that's an excellent question. What you are seeing right now is they are raging against the dying of their privilege. Right? They are looking out on Sunday mornings, and they're seeing empty pews staring back at them instead of young faces. And they can read the demographics as well as we can. They know where this is going, and they're in their last gasp, and they're doing massive damage in that last gasp. I mean, our courts are pushed in the very Christian conservative direction for a generation at least right now, and they're doing a lot of damage in their last gasp. But I think what you are seeing is because the populace is trending away from it, they're raging against the dying of their privilege.
Now, is this apathy on the part of the majority then? How do we fix that? How are we allowing a minority religious sector of the populace to infuse our government with so much of their theocracy?
I think people were surprised. People before the 2016 election, most people wouldn't wouldn't have even known what Christian nationalism was. But now they are waking up. And there was just a study released last month 2 months ago in Morning Consult, which said that now 47% of the country view Christian nationalism as a threat to America. And the number one thing that we need to do is the identity, the political theology of Christian nationalism is based on this common well of lies and myths. That we are founded as a Christian nation, that the Founding Fathers were all Christian, that they prayed during the Constitutional Convention, that the Declaration of Independence references our Creator 4 different times. In God we trust, one nation under God. This common well of lies and myths. You've heard them all before. And we have to not just have better facts at our disposal to defeat those myths, but better arguments. And that is really what I try to do in the founding myth, is give the secular movement, secular Americans, and anybody who's not a Christian nationalist, really, better arguments to stand up and fight back against this political theology. Because there have been plenty of books written about why we are not a Christian nation, but they typically just get to the point, hey, here's what the Founding Fathers said, here's what they meant, here's what was really happening at the founding. They don't take the next step. And in the founding myth, I do that. I go on the offensive. The goal of that book is to utterly destroy the Christian nationalist identity and all the myths that underlie it.
Do we all need to get a little more on the offensive? Is that
we absolutely do, and one of the things, it's right there in the title. When I say that Christian nationalism is un-American, that is to me a new argument that we need to be making. It's not enough to say to just repeat the facts. Otherwise, Donald Trump would not be president, right? Facts are not enough right now. We have to do a better job of arguing, and that often means employing more emotional or hard-hitting arguments that aren't just based on facts. I think one of the things I love about the secular movement is we embrace nuance. We embrace reality in a way that a lot of, especially Christian nationalists, will not do. But it can hamstring us a little bit when we're having these fights. And so I'm really trying to give us better arguments that we can fight back against this political theology with.
Dan Barker, you wrote the foreword to the book. There's a lot of atheist books out there, some rendered by your own hand. What makes this one different?
So I didn't write the foreword. Susan Jacoby wrote a wonderful foreword, and I claim 2 pages of this huge book. It's a little preface that sort of talks about Andrew and his work here and what he does, as an attorney for constitutional law and all that. So to just sort of set up what kind of a person he is, how dedicated he has been to the cause, and getting up early in the morning and working on in his private time, in addition to his full load here, to research for about 10 years, was it, Andrew?
Yeah, about a decade.
To work on this. So of course I care about this also as a former evangelical Christian nationalist. I wasn't really one of these blowhards, but I did believe we were founded as a Christian nation when I was a preacher. And I would have said back then that, yeah, for practical reasons, we did set up a secular government, but none of the founders were atheists. They all believed in some kind of a God, and many of them quoted Scripture. Some of them went to church. And so even though we don't have any explicit wording that America is a Christian nation, and even though there's no God in the Constitution, we all know that what was in their minds and in their hearts as they were drawing upon good Christian principles. And so Andrew's book does a great job of showing that that's just not the case. A lot of these, for example, I was impressed with the story he tells about prayer at the Continental Congress, that first government that failed miserably. They did actually pray there. And Christian nationalists will point to that prayer and say, look, they prayed at our founding. Well, that wasn't our founding. That was a failed founding. But what Andrew points out in the book is that prayer really was not that sincere. He was invited for, why don't you tell the story, Andrew? Dusche.
Jacob Dusche.
Yeah, that was his name, yeah.
Yeah, and then he was the chaplain that the first Congress hired it, and he was chosen for political reasons because he was a member of, they wanted to kind of get the Anglican Church more on the side of the revolution and independence. And so they chose Jacob Dusche to deliver this invocation. And I mean, John Adams admitted in his diary that this was a political calculation. It wasn't a manifestation of piety. It was strictly a political calculation. And then
the Anglican Church was allied with England. They were against the colonists.
Exactly. And later on, when you look at what Jacob Duché did, I mean, he repudiated independence, wrote this really awful letter to George Washington, denigrating the Continental Congress, saying we have to completely reject the Declaration of Independence. He called the Continental Army that were fighting for independence a bunch of cowards, and actually fled home to England. And this is the man that the Christian Nationalists hold up as the guy who gave us government prayer in the first place.
And there was no actual government prayer at our real founding, at the real Constitutional Convention.
Which is a very common myth from the Christian nationalist standpoint. They often say, Ben Franklin proposed and they had prayer at the Constitutional Convention, which is partly true. Ben Franklin proposed a prayer, and some people think that he even did it sort of tongue-in-cheek. But he also wrote that the convention, except for 3 or 4 persons, found the proposal found prayers unnecessary. They didn't pray,
at least not formally. Maybe a couple of them prayed that morning or something privately.
Right. Now, in your opinion, after doing your research, were any of the founders in any way what we would identify as an evangelical Christian today?
Probably not as an evangelical Christian today, certainly. But the bigger point that I try to make in the book, and this goes back to what I'm trying to say where our side needs better arguments here, is that it doesn't matter. The religion of the founding fathers does not matter. And it's a really fun debate to have, and it's a really fun conversation to have. And I'm tempted to write a whole book on it. You easily could. Many people have. But for the idea about whether the United States was founded as a Christian nation or based on Judeo-Christian principles, it is completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter what they personally believed. You would still have to then show that the religious beliefs and principles of their religion were used as the basis of this nation. And that's what I look at in the book. I investigate all the different principles of Judeo-Christianity that are, for instance, right there in the Ten Commandments or in the Bible, and show that they are fundamentally opposed to the principles on which the founders used to build this nation. So it doesn't matter what they personally believed.
Is it a readable book, Dan?
Oh yeah, it's fun to read. If you're into this kind of movement, it's not just the legal side, but also the free thought side of it as well. Looking at the reasons why we are not a Christian nation. And Andrew's right that Christianity, Judeo-Christianity, is indeed un-American, but a further point to that is that it's also dangerous, even if it were American. Even if there were American principles, we would be a horrible country. It is a dangerous ideology to impose upon a free society.
Well, I've always thought that those of us in this movement are actually the only ones who are sticking up for real freedom of religion, because what these Christians don't understand, in my mind, is that as soon as they open the door to this, they open the door to the possibility of the government sanctioning against their particular version of Christianity. And I don't think that any of them see the trap. Is that a reasonable concern?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. There is no such thing as the freedom of religion without a government that is free from religion. True religious freedom requires a secular government, and the founders were actually very, very clear on that point, and that's one of the reasons they chose to separate state and church in the first place. Another reason is because religion is incredibly divisive, and historically we've seen that it can really shatter public peace and societies, and they wanted to keep that division out of a government that depends on compromise and depends on the people having this informed discourse to reach the best way to govern at that particular point in time.
Really interesting stuff. I love the whole subject, and the book is called The Founding Myth. You can find it on Kindle, Amazon, wherever you buy books these days.
And at FFRF Shop.
Of course, at FFRF Shop. You can find that online, too, at ffrf.org.
And
/shop, and you can buy all your good atheist paraphernalia there, as well as the book.
And if you buy it on ffrf.org and leave a little note in the notes section when you check out and ask me to sign it, I will do that.
Nice.
You get a signed copy through FFRF.
A signed copy. Check out The Founding Myth, and it's been out a month. Is it on the bestseller list yet?
On the Amazon, it's been top of the Amazon Atheism list and Christian Commentaries list and Constitutions list, apparently.
Nice,
so
nice. Not that you're paying attention.
My publisher likes to send me updates every couple of days. So
it's also cool. The top of FFRF's bookshop list too. So
Oh,
it's
all right.
flying out the doors here.
It's new. It's hot. Get your copy now or read it on your device. Thanks so much, and good luck with that, Andrew. And I can't wait to read it myself. It's The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American.